Hello, everybody. I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and Metaphor Refantazio is almost upon us. It's almost out. And there's been one little point of contention that I want to talk about in this video. Oh my god, it's just like Persona 5! Yeah, let's talk about it. Metaphor Refantazio is an upcoming RPG from Atlus. They also make series like Shin Megami Tensei and Persona. So when we saw them make a new IP with Metaphor Refantazio, naturally a lot of people interested in this game will be people that are fans of Atlus's games before, whether that be Shin Megami Tensei or Persona. And when you dig into the specifics of Metaphor Refantazio, I think one thing is abundantly clear. This game, in a lot of ways, is its own IP, but it's using lessons and techniques and mechanics from other Atlus games like Shin Megami Tensei and like Persona, and bringing them into one game with a bunch of fresh ideas to create something new. However, the internet being the internet, sometimes a lot of inaccurate comparisons or just repetitive and overused comparisons can really drag down conversation. If you are familiar with Dark Souls, you will understand this phenomenon, where that game blew up, and then any other game that was even remotely difficult was called the Dark Souls of roguelikes, the Dark Souls of FPS, the Dark Souls of MMOs, the Dark Souls of Dark Souls. And even when games played fundamentally differently to Dark Souls, a lot of games got lumped into that overall category of being like Dark Souls, and it watered down the definition to the point of absurdity. I'm a Dark Souls fan. I love FromSoft. They're one of my favorite studios. But calling any game the Dark Souls of blank isn't descriptive, isn't helpful, and just, in my opinion, does a piss poor job of just communicating the idea that the game is hard. Now, there are Souls-likes. There are games that take after the Souls identity and the methodology of implementing difficulty and making that engaging in the game. There's absolutely games like that. Black Myth Wukong is an amazing example to me, where you will have some people that say, this is not a Souls-like, and to me, I say, if you play the game for any length of time, it absolutely is. There's a lot of inspiration and just mechanics that are intrinsic to Souls and Souls-likes that are in that game. So when some people try and push back against the use of that idea, that it's a Souls-like because in the past, and for a lot of other games, it's been so overdone. Like, I understand the reluctance to use terminology like this, but in that case, I think it applies. That is even more so the case when it comes to Metaphor Refantazio. It is not one-for-one Persona. It is not a Persona game. It is its own IP, but at the end of the day, it is an Atlus game. And I think the best way to describe Metaphor Refantazio would be a fantasy RPG where the combat is heavily inspired from Shin Megami Tensei, whereas the overworld and time mechanics and pretty much a lot of the narrative structure for the game comes from Persona, was heavily inspired by it. I've gotten pushback in the past for calling Metaphor Refantazio very similar to Persona, or jokingly calling it fantasy Persona, because in a lot of ways it is. Some people view that to be a negative thing, almost as if you're holding the series back by saying it has to be always directly referenced to Persona. My opinion, it's a compliment because I think it's Atlus doing what Atlus does best. That is, taking the ideas of games they've done before, building off of them and saying, okay, we've done this idea before, how can we iterate on it? How can we make it better, more interesting, more fun, more fulfilling? One of the best examples for this, in my opinion, is just looking back at the chronological releases of Persona entries, and you can see from game to game them actively tinkering with the formula to try and make it better, or just trying new things, or reeling some things back if they go too far with one entry. When it comes to Metaphor Refantazio, now they have the opportunity to take these ideas that they've done repeatedly before, whether that is in Shin Megami Tensei or in Persona, and with my background mostly being in Persona, I'm going to be mostly drawing comparisons to that franchise, franchise there. There's a lot of taking those ideas, those mechanics, like the narrative structure being about managing your time, committing to various different activities to level up social stats in this game called Royal Virtues that'll enable you to perform other activities or talk to other NPCs, stuff like that. All the while leveling up your own rank with each of these quote-unquote social links / characters in the overworld with this social simulator vibe going on with it. Whereas in Persona, you always got that vibe in the high school environment. Now we have this fantasy adventure going around this fantasy world. The whole bunch of unique character designs and just a bunch of fresh ideas and beautiful locations. You can take these ideas that we are accustomed to from Persona and just by simply implementing them in the world of Metaphor, they can feel fresh and new, but you can also see how rock solid these mechanics actually are and how malleable they can be. Because the structure of Persona can be kind of considered to be strict, balancing a high school life alongside the JRPG dungeon crawling adventure to save the world. Whereas in Metaphor, you're going on this round-the-world adventure to rally support for your cause so that the moon from Majora may deem you worthy enough to become the king of the world, or the empire. Actually, it's the United Kingdom. Like, even in the demo, you can see a lot of these mechanics that you come to know from Persona, but the way they're implemented in Metaphor, in my opinion, is a great step in the right direction. In this video, I genuinely wanted to talk about the overall comparison between Metaphor and Persona, but I think in retrospect, I should talk about the similarities, so just here's a brief list. The overall narrative structure is quite similar. What do I mean by that? When it comes to characters, at least for the characters that we're introduced to, they have some big moment of character development or some big realization that unlocks some kind of understanding deep within themselves, and that manifests in the form of their archetype. And you also have the game being based around the calendar, where the main story is broken up into various operations, and you can complete the main dungeon at any point in that operation, but you just have to do it by the expiration date. And for all those other dates, what you can do is like hang around town, leveling up various royal virtues or social stats, talking to NPCs, doing side quests, go explore optional dungeons. It's kind of the world is your oyster here, but it is based on these time slots where certain activities will take up the remainder of that time and then move you to the night or the next day. Character design as well, a little bit. Like the main character, who I call Jay Makoto, looks a lot like the protagonist from Persona 3, Makoto, but also a little bit of Aigis as well, which has been a bit of a meme. But you also have Stroll, who looks a lot, or at least similar, to Yu Narukami from Persona 4. That one's more just like an interesting tidbit than one of the things I'm really alluding to in this video. But let's also talk about the Royal Virtues. These are overall social stats that don't aid you in combat, but they allow you to perform certain activities in the overworld or be able to talk to certain NPCs, or certain dialogue options are locked behind a certain rank of these Royal Virtues. So a big part of your time playing the game will be to level these things up because they unlock more and more things that you can actually do. Like, you need rank 2 wisdom to actually purify things at the church, and that's a pretty important mechanic. And funnily enough, that purify mechanic is something I know from Persona 5. Not saying it hasn't been in other games, just I know that mechanic from Persona 5 with the laundry machine, where you get a piece of gear and you may not be able to equip it right away because you have to perform some activity to actually get the benefits and the usability out of that item. Or even in Metaphor Refantazio's case, you have some items that you can use, but if you want them to be even stronger, you then have to purify them. Like the sword you get if you're able to defeat the dragon in the cave. Also, this game has social links, or at least a mechanic very similar to them, where you are able to forge relationships with these various NPCs and progress your rank with these individual NPCs by hanging out with them and talking to them or performing certain activities with them. And this is what I'm talking about in this video, where Atlus are great at taking ideas from old and retooling them to fit the modern game, or to go in a different direction to try and make them more fun and interesting. In Persona, you would be able to unlock certain personas by maxing out a confidant or a social link, but here, if you progress to a certain rank of that social link, you can then unlock a new form for your archetype, or for an archetype. Like Warrior can eventually evolve to one of two things, one of them being samurai, and that's cool in my opinion. It does a great job of blending those social simulator elements from the overworld alongside the dungeon crawling combat that this game also has. But also, this game, in my opinion, does a really cool job of taking these mechanics that we know from Persona, but making them fit here. Like the royal virtues being aspects that you would kind of want out of a leader or out of a king, which is what you're aiming to become in this game. Same thing with the social link mechanic. The whole idea of the game is you have to build up this wellspring of support, and you will need certain characters that are really important to your cause standing alongside you, so you're able to flesh out and build up your reputation with these characters and just your overall bond with them. It's taking the familiar and retooling them to work with this specific concept. Side quests giving you XP for royal virtues is a great feature. You can actually see your progress to the next rank of a royal virtue. Even this early on, side quests feel more in-depth, compelling, and engaging. And I can just imagine how much variety in the activities that actually will end up being, because the whole goal of the game is to go from location to location. You're not just in Yasuinaba. You're not just in the city or in Tokyo. You're going to various cities. You're going around the world and exploring it. And the simple act of navigating the world takes up time as well, and while you're traveling you have other activities to do. There's a lot of cool and fresh ideas in Metaphor, but I think the pushback that some people have to try and quell any comparison to Persona are not doing it justice for Metaphor. Because I understand why some people have this like knee-jerk reaction and this antagonistic viewpoint to comparing Metaphor Refantazio to Persona. I understand where that's coming from. When you have a lot of people out there that compare everything to Persona, it can be draining to have a discussion about it. But especially when the IP comes from the same studio, I think the comparison is apt, especially when it's this obvious. I think where I would personally push back on the Persona 5 narrative, or just Persona narrative, is if people expect Metaphor to be exactly like Persona. That's where I would push back if people view it to be a con that it doesn't have romance, or if it doesn't have insert specific mechanic or nuance to Persona here, because it is its own IP. I want to play the game. I want to play the full game, view it in its own context, treat it like its own IP, not just as if it's Persona 6. Now, I do think it is kind of apt to describe it as fantasy Persona for shorthand, because chances are, if you enjoy Persona and you enjoy the structure of a Persona game and the way that it operates, chances are you'll probably enjoy Metaphor Refantazio, at least what I played in the demo. And the hope is that when it's all said and done, Metaphor Refantazio will be able to stand on its own two legs as its own IP. But at least for me, in a lot of ways, Metaphor is doing what I love to see from Atlus time and time again, that is taking ideas from the old and retooling them to make them more fun and compelling. One of my biggest issues with a lot of Persona games is the side quests. They can often be grindy or just feel as if they're not worth it, and the rewards can feel lackluster. But like, even in the first few hours, in the demo, they're so much better in my opinion. They have their own little mini narrative arcs. They can unlock additional optional dungeons for me to go out and explore that don't just feel like throwaway dungeons. The Goblin dungeon in the demo is pretty dang cool. It's simple, but I think it works because of its simplicity. It feels like great fantasy. Oh, there's this castle that's been overtaken by a bunch of goblins. Go in, loot it, and beat some really cool Minotaur guy. What a great idea! The rewards for quite a few of the side quests are royal virtue experience, so I feel further incentivized to actually do these side quests, and I don't just fall into the Persona way of doing things where the optimal way to level up these social stats is to just do the same activity where you watch an NPC sit in a location doing some kind of task taking up a chunk of time. Leveling up Wisdom to 2 in the demo was great. I sat on a bench once, and then I went to do a side quest, and by doing that side quest and sitting in that one bench, I got to rank 2. It didn't feel drawn out, it didn't feel cumbersome, it felt like what Atlus does best, taking ideas from the past and saying, how can we make this better? How can we make this more engaging? And when it comes to Metaphor, hey, how can we take these ideas that we've done in the past for other series, but how can we bring them into this fantasy environment and make them feel as if they belong? So, in my opinion, is Metaphor Refantazio fantasy Persona? To some degree, yeah, and I think for shorthand, if you want to get someone into the series, I think it can be a good rule of thumb. Is it one-for-one Persona? Absolutely not. Will some people probably overuse this term? Almost certainly. But do I think it's an identity that Metaphor Refantazio should try and hide away from? No, because I also don't think it's trying to either. I don't think this is the case of, say, a game that's completely unrelated and just simply calling it the Dark Souls of X. There's a lot of clear comparisons and a lot of mechanics lifted out of Persona and for combat Shin Megami Tensei, but retooled for this game, and I think it's all the better for that. Because it feels fresh and new, it feels like its own IP, but at the end of it all, you still feel that DNA of being an Atlus game. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Leave a comment down below with how you are feeling about Metaphor Refantazio. Did you play the demo? Did you enjoy it? Who was your favorite character? And what was your favorite moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and to hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. I'm Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming. Until we meet again.